Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll get a spring council preview from Councilmember Isaiah Thomas. Director of the Opioid Response Unit, Noelle Foysen, will join us. And our own Denise Clay Murray will preview her Friday column. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good, Larry. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's 8 more days until the spring city council session starts.
Yeah, we're counting them down. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see just how much work they actually get done in the middle of an election year. And, contrary to what we've been hearing from some of our council people, that is not going to be as easy as people think.
I agree with you. I think there's a couple things at play here that are all going to happen like at the same time. You've got city council, which in and of itself is a
Mhm.
challenge. You're going to have the spring budget hearings that are going to start, budget season starts in March. And you're going to have an election, the primary election leading up to May. So, and then, you have the other things where it's like, all right, what are we doing about the violence? What are we doing about poverty? We know we have some extra budget money. What are we going to do with it? So you have so many different things happening at the same time that I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be a major challenge for council to you know, to focus on one thing at a time. It's going to be a big problem, I think. Well, and problem maybe isn't the right word, but a big challenge this spring. And oh, go ahead, Denise. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say it is going to be a big challenge because you have you're going to be. I mean, in addition to the people on council who are going to be running for reelection, you are going to have mayoral candidates coming out of your ears like those monkeys that you used to have in a chain as a kid. That's what it's going to be like, and it's going to be interesting to see how these council people deal with the fact that people who were once in their chamber with them, that were their colleagues and friends, are now running against each other and basically flinging mud from a catapult at each other. So
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see how they manage that.
right. So tonight we're going to have another installment of our city council previews. This time with council member Isaiah Thomas, and here he is telling us about what his goals are for the spring. All right, Councilmember Isaiah Thomas, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work you guys do. It's important.
Thank you. And the first thing I'd like to ask you about, we did want to look forward a little bit, but before we get to that, early in the fall session, you had discussed and proposed uh, some ideas for stemming gun violence called the Collaborative Recommendations for Addressing Gun Violence. Can you just remind us a little bit about what that was, and then sort of maybe what has happened over the fall with that?
Yeah, I mean, so basically what we did was spend the summer and a few weeks leading to the summer of last year preparing what we felt like was our perspective on crime in the city of Philadelphia and some of the things that we as government can do to address crime right now. We know that with crime, you have issues around public education as well as deep poverty. And we know from a systemic perspective, you're not going to be able to fix crime, which is a symptom of other problems until those deeper problems are addressed. But we did feel like as government and as a city, there were some things that we can do right now. And some of the things that we recommended in that proposal actually came into fruition, which we're proud of. So we talked about putting more money into the managing director's office for witnesses and victim protection. Clearly, there's some questions around money that's been allocated to that specifically in the past. While we're still trying to find answers to what that is, we still continue to allocate money towards witness and victim protection. And that was one of the things in the recommendation. We didn't allocate as much as I wanted to, but at the same time, we're happy that this is something that we were able to accomplish. We also talked about putting more money into departments to clean the city. We're proud of the fact that that actually happened this fall with a transfer ordinance. So we were able to put a few more dollars into CLIP, into the streets department, to help with the issues of cleanliness and illegal dumping, along with the Citizens Watchdog bill that I introduced that hasn't been passed into law yet, but just another example of us looking to address some of the issues around cleanliness and illegal dumping in the city of Philadelphia. We also recommended a lot of money go into cameras. Unfortunately, that hasn't come into fruition yet because we put so much money into cameras already that haven't been ordered to put more money into cameras while we're still waiting for previous dollars to get spent on cameras from previous budgets. That would have been a little counterproductive. So we're hoping that the administration can expedite the process as it relates to getting us cameras in more sections of the city. And once that's done, we'll be prepared to appropriate even more money to put more cameras up so we can try to keep the people of Philadelphia as safe as possible. We have recommendations for the district attorney's office, specifically looking at 503 in Gun Court, which is Judge Moss's courtroom. We ended up developing a good relationship with Judge Moss and President Judge Dugan and some of the other folks that's over in charge of the judicial process. And in the midst of developing those relationships, one of the things that we recommended was some level of consistency in the district attorney's office. And I'm happy to report that working with DA Krasner as well as G. Lamar Stewart and the entire team over there, we did see a different routine as it relates to the type of lawyers that are in 503 and the level of continuity that we can see as it relates to not having as much turnover, specifically in Gun Court. While those things were some of the accomplishments that came out of that report this fall, we clearly know that we have to do more as a legislative body as well as the city overall to try to continue to put dents in the crime crisis that we're facing in the city of Philadelphia.
Okay. Now, looking ahead, next week is the first council session after the break. What are you keeping an eye on, and what are your key goals for the spring session?
Thank you. That's a great question. I didn't realize it was next week. It seemed like it already started just because we've hit the ground running as it relates to the work outside of actual council sessions. And so I think first and foremost for me is looking at my hat as it relates to being the chair of the education committee. We're really looking to push the school district of Philadelphia to come up with a capital plan to address infrastructure issues within our schools. That's going to be a big priority for us. We're looking at the fiscal viability of the city overall, hoping that when some of the federal stimulus dollars run out, that we don't fall into a recession. So thinking about the economic side of the city, the economic viability of the city, as well as our current operating budget. Those are going to be the top priorities. I have other legislation that I'm watching. I talked about the Citizens Watchdog bill earlier. I also have my NIL bill that I introduced last fall that looks to protect student athletes, and we're going to try our best to make sure that that's passed into law and make sure that it's implemented in a way that is in the best interest of student athletes across the city of Philadelphia. Again, we're going to be in budget season this year, so making sure money is appropriated to the appropriate departments to address some of the crises that we're facing across the city of Philadelphia. Also still am closely working with the administration and other partners around driving equality. That is still something that's pending, and it's still something that we're in court battles about. We want to make sure that law is working to the best of its ability. In a couple of weeks, we'll be at the 1-year anniversary since the implementation of the law. So we're looking at what does that data consist of, and we want to make sure that that bill is doing what it's supposed to do. Clearly, there'll be other things that we'll focus on, but that's a good brief overview of what I'm going to really try to wrap my arms around, from public education to previous bills that's introduced to the economic viability of the city of Philadelphia.
And you had mentioned the upcoming budget cycle happens every spring. What are some of the key things you're keeping an eye on as we go into budget season?
Well, I talked about capital and infrastructure as it relates to the schools. And what does that capital plan consist of? That's going to be something that's really important to me. I want to make sure that we're investing in as many prevention-based initiatives as possible. When we were looking at cleaning up some things with the transfer ordinance this fall, I was excited to be able to advocate for things that would put us in a position where we're already planning for the summer of 2023 now. And that's something that's really important. When we're talking about the crime crisis in the city, we know in the summertime it's much worse. We know that the culprits as well as the victims are getting younger and younger. So I've really pushed us as a city to try our best to invest in as many prevention-based initiatives initiatives as possible, putting money into out of school time based initiatives as well as what we do in the summertime. Outside of that, we have a unique tax structure that we always try to look at every year, thinking about the fiscal viability of the city. We're looking at how we save and what we're investing in as it relates to our pension fund, as well as what we're putting aside for in our rainy day fund. So those are things that are pretty boring, but very important. And if it wasn't for how we invested in pensions and rainy day funds, as well as some of the stimulus dollars, we would be in a bad place as a city. So what does it look like as it relates to our city's economic viability and the recovery of the city post-pandemic? That's going to be my number one priority. Outside of my number two priority is investing in things that can address the crime in the city of Philadelphia. And then, of course, like I said multiple times, pushing the school district to have a capital plan to invest in the infrastructure of our schools, because at the end of the day, a lot of these problems that we have stems from a lack of quality education. So if we really want to put ourselves in a position to solve systemic problems, we have to fix our schools, and that starts with the actual physical brick and mortar structure of the actual building.
The city still has a surprising and significant surplus. Are you looking to see some of those funds be spent in this budget cycle? And if so, what are you looking at specifically to direct them to?
Some of them, yeah. I mean, we want to spend some money on prevention and intervention-based initiatives, but especially prevention. We've spent heavy on intervention, but not as much on prevention as we should. We have done that through the lens of arts and culture and invested in those spaces, as well as parks and recs and other initiatives. We know that we're going through the era of the Great Resignation. People aren't working, and that's the private sector as well as the public sector. So we've been working with our local unions as well as the administration to figure out what incentives can we offer people to take city employment and to be employed by the city of Philadelphia. That's something that isn't legislative, but it's something that we're going to advocate for throughout the course of this budget cycle. And it's imperative that we're thinking about these things in a nuanced way to do our best to attract the top talent and the top businesses to come to our city, to live in our city, to court our city, and to grow in our city.
All right, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hey, Denise, how are you?
I'm good, and thank you for joining us, council member. I really appreciate it.
I love coming to talk to you guys.
Well, I guess my question is, I just read something. It was this morning, actually, where the driving equity bill seems to be starting to catch on across the country. Have you heard from people about that? Have you been helping people create their own driving equity bills?
Actually, yes. We went out to Pittsburgh to talk to Pittsburgh City Council out in Allegheny County. We've been up to New York, Rochester to talk to folks over there. We've talked to folks on the West Coast about it. I've presented it in a lot of legal spaces. It's something that, you know how we are in Philadelphia, right? So, here locally, there has been some pushback, but folks outside of the city and really all across the country are looking at Philadelphia and the legislation as a model to address some of the injustices that take place at motor vehicle stops, as well as a way to become more efficient as it relates to policing. And, the next phase of that for us is how do we use technology to begin to enforce some of these minor motor vehicle code violations that's not a public safety hazard. So I love my staff and we love talking to other cities and other counties all across the country about the legislation. And you're absolutely right. It's something that a lot of municipalities and local governments are interested in.
Do you think that that's because people are realizing that there's a better use for police officers? And because, let's face it, while Philadelphia has a gun violence problem, it's just not restricted to here. Do you think it's because people are like, okay, maybe there's a better way that we can do this, that we can we can use our police officers to deal with more heinous crimes?
Yeah, I think that one lens is looking at the level of efficiency in police departments. I think another lens is looking at some of the injustices that take place between communities of color and law enforcement, and how do you begin to repair those relationships. And I think another means is through the umbrella of efficiency, again, is limiting the interactions to not just help the public, but also to help law enforcement in the midst of safety and to save money. Last year, the city of Philadelphia spent over $20 million on lawsuits dealing with law enforcement. And while we know that that is a significant issue, we try our best to be efficient. And we feel like one of the ways to address that crisis that we're facing right now is to minimize the interactions and have the interactions be ones that start with some level of positivity so we can begin to mend and continue to improve relationships between community of color and law enforcement.
Now, as you approach the budget season and you're doing this, knowing that, Philadelphia does have a little bit more to work with, what are some of your budgetary priorities? And, if you have different ones from like in previous years, what's changed?
I mean, I always have different budget priorities every year because the city's facing different things. And my thinking evolves, right? Like I'm a freshman member of council who's quickly expedited to one of the more senior members of council, but at the end of the day, I'm still a freshman. So I'm still learning. I'm constantly growing. I'm always collecting information, and I'm always listening and talking to constituents to hear what they're facing. And I try to do my advocacy based on those responses, based on what people tell me. So yeah, I haven't been the most consistent as it relates to what I advocate for, but there are certain things that are just a part of the DNA of what it means to be Councilman Isaiah Thomas. And that starts with working with youth and young people. I've been very consistent in my advocacy for education, for libraries, for rec centers, for prevention-based initiatives, for out-of-school time programs that work. That's never going to change. But, some cycles we'll see a situation where we need to put some money in a district attorney's office, right? To be able to have a specific unit that is focused on stolen cars. I'm going to support that. There are other times where we need to put technology in a managing director's office to be able to help address the hit and run crisis that we're seeing in the city of Philadelphia and be able to have the technology we need to collect evidence so we can begin to solve those crimes and improve those clearance rates. I'm going to support stuff like that. Sometimes what happens is we have these one-off things that we try to put money into, or things that are good for the moment, like stimulus dollars that we've provided during the pandemic, that when we move into different spaces as it relates to where we are as a city, the level of advocacy and the amount of dollars that's needed tends to change. So this year, my priorities are going to be a little bit different. My team and I will still crafting out some of those things of what it's going to be. But right now, it's really about the economic viability of the city of Philadelphia, right? At the end of the day, we do have a surplus. We do have a good amount of money that we are essentially able to work with as it relates to the annual operating budget. But we also know that the projections tell us that that's not going to be the case forever. We're 100% sure that we're going to run out of stimulus dollars. So as a legislator, it's my job not just to think about this year, but to think about policies that's going to impact the next couple of years. So when we do run out of federal stimulus dollars, we're not cutting programs and services or raising taxes, right? That's really what I want to focus on this budget cycle. And again, I'm going to have a number of priorities, but my priorities are going to be based around the idea of thinking about the economic viability of the city.
Well, for my last question, and it's funny that you mentioned that you're still technically a freshman, but because of changes within council, you've kind of become one of the more senior members of council. Whether we like it or not, this is an election year. You have the mayor's office coming up. You have all the city council races coming up. This is going to be your first time running for re-election. How do you adjust the electoral side with the I still got to do my job side?
I mean, first of all, Denise, I think that's a great question. And I think anybody who tells you one doesn't have to do with the other, I don't know, maybe they're just better than me. Because it does have an impact. And, when I govern and when I take my vote, I try to every time, vote my heart, vote my conscience, vote what's in the best interest of the citizens of Philadelphia. And the reality is news cycles, they're constant. What's news in December of 2022 is going to be totally different than what headlines consist of in January 2023. And I think far too often we live in a world and society of instant gratification. And it's not necessarily about what have you done, but it's more about what have you done lately. So I do think that I've put together a track record and a body of work that's one to be proud of. But at the end of the day, the average everyday constituent in the city of Philadelphia is suffering. They're not looking at drive inequality or to illuminate the arts grants or some of the other successes that we've had. They're thinking about the shooting that just took place on their block. They're thinking about the pothole that they just hit that put a flat tire in their car. So for me, I am conscious of it. It's something that is going to be on my radar throughout the course of governing. I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on my decision making, because I feel like I've always voted my conscience and voted my heart and fought for the things that I felt like is in the best interest of the citizens of Philadelphia, even when that wasn't necessarily popular. Denise, I think the hardest thing about this is going to be balancing my time. I'm a father of 3 now. I have a baby girl. I'm a girl dad, so I'm super proud of that. And she's only 2 months old. My 10-year-old son has a schedule that's just as rigorous as mine. And, my wife is a working professional who's never going to give up that title because she's talented and intelligent, and she shouldn't. And on top of all that, I still coach high school sports and do a number of other things that put me in a position to not just stay informed, but give back. So running a campaign while wearing all these different hats are going to be difficult, but I have a lot of good people around me who's going to make sure I stay organized and try to put me in the best position to be able to accomplish all the things I need to accomplish. So at the end of the day, it's a huge burden that I know is coming and is going to be here for the next 5 months. Like I said before, it would be disingenuous to say that it's not going to have an impact on things. But I think more than my decision making, my advocacy, and my votes, it's going to have a huge impact on my time.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Well, thank you, Denise. And council member, thank you so much for being with us.
Anytime. You guys asked amazing questions, and I think that this is information that the public needs to hear because we represent the public. We work for the people.
Well, thank you very much, Councilman. All right. We'd like to thank Councilmember Isaiah Thomas for joining us here on Hall Monitor. Now, last week in our Friday newsletter, we had an article about a press conference the administration and the mayor had held at the McPherson Square Library in Kensington, where they talked about how they were going to allocate opioid settlement funds. So the article, we kind of gave you a breakdown on what that money is going to be spent on. We decided that we wanted to give you a little more content with that, and a little bit more of an understanding of where the opioid resources are going. So we arranged an interview with the director of the opioid response unit. Her name is Noelle Foisen, and we recorded that earlier today, so you can get a better idea of what the city is working on right now to put a dent in the opioid problem. So here's our interview with Noelle Foisen. Okay, we are here with Noelle Foisen, the director of the opioid response unit. Noelle, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Larry. I'm really happy to be on the show.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, my name is Noelle Foisen. I'm the director of the Managing Director's Office Opioid Response Unit for the City of Philadelphia. I come to this work, though, as a trained social worker and also an emergency manager. I spent 10 years at the city's Office of Emergency Management before I moved over here in 2020 to start running the newly formed Opioid Response Unit at that time.
And how did the opioid response team sort of come together?
Yeah, so it actually came out of, it was a natural progression. If you recall, in 2016, Mayor Kenney launched an opioid task force. And from that process, there was a lot of recommendations and implementation plan that came out of that. In 2018, he declared an emergency in Kensington, and that's actually where I got involved at the Office of Emergency Management. And I ran that operation over there, and that was titled the Philadelphia Resilience Project. There's a lot of work that happened during that time. When the emergency declaration expired at the end of 2019, there was not by any means this thought that we've solved everything, we're done, it's no longer an emergency. We actually recognized that there needed to be an office that was tracking all the interdepartmental work that was happening across 35 city agencies to try to improve quality of life and conditions in Kensington and for the individuals that are struggling with substance misuse. So that's where I came in. And so they asked me to run this operation. I've been doing it since 2020. It was a little challenging our first year because we launched literally right before the COVID shutdown. So it was challenging in the beginning. But we do have, there's 4 strategy groups that work. A lot of the names that you would want to be involved in this effort. So for our treatment strategy, DBHIDS leads that. For our prevention strategy, public health department leads that. For our public safety strategy, it's joint led between the police department and the Office of Criminal Justice. And our community support strategy is led by Health and Human Services and Community Services. And so it's all the subject matter experts, the brightest minds that we have working at the city that are all working together to solve this problem. And my role is to make sure that we're coordinating, we're not duplicating effort, we have the ability to advocate for resources, policy changes, those types of things. And so that's the role of our unit. We do put out an action plan every year. Our next action plan is coming out in March. And what that action plan does is that it provides the framework for accountability, right, for the residents of Philadelphia. Like, what is happening with this crisis? What are the pieces that we're trying to move along? And it clearly identifies pieces that we're trying to accomplish in that calendar year. And then the following year's action plan provides a summary of like, this is what we're able to move forward. This is what we had challenges with. This is what we forecast we'll be doing in the upcoming calendar year. And so our next action plan is coming out in March, but our current action plan is on our website at philadelphia.com/opioids if you'd like to check it out.
So it'd be fair to say that your office is a hub to
Yes.
bring all different agencies together in this town.
Absolutely.
One of the things you said that I find encouraging is that your background is in social work.
Mhm.
And this always seemed like more of a problem that required that kind of background rather than maybe a law enforcement background or even a more medical background. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and I like that you caught on that because it is something that I find as a strength that I bring to this role is that social work background because my positioning within the managing director's office, like I'm not part of public safety. I'm not part of health and human services. Like I'm completely outside of that. And with my training in macro social work, like I understand how people operate within systems and how to work collaboratively to move something forward. And so I've been the face of everything that we're doing currently in Kensington. And so I attend a ton of community meetings. I constantly am replying to constituent emails, doing a lot of problem solving, but we're always focused on the larger systems at play and how they're impacting the individuals. And a big priority for our unit is trying to hold in balance the individual that's struggling with substance misuse and the community impact of that. And at times, they get off scale, but that's really our role here is trying to create a better Philadelphia for all our residents here.
So you're heading up this office. You have some resources to do that. And then the opioid settlement funds start coming to Philadelphia. And that's already sort of begun. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And last week we reported on the press conference that you and the mayor and other members of the community and the administration attended. So can you tell us a little bit about these funds and sort of what the general plan is here?
Yeah, so we're actually really excited about the settlement. And as you mentioned, the announcement last week, it's really going to give us, it's adding capacity, right? And so there's been a lot of resources that the city has dedicated towards this, but there's never enough. And so having this infusion of cash with allowable uses that it needs to be focused on, right? So gave us the ability to actually push forward some things that have been in the planning stage, but we haven't actually been able to implement, right? And so one big thing that we're really excited about is mobile methadone. That's something that the Department of Behavioral Health has been scoping and figuring out the framework and what it could look like and having all the regulatory conversations that you need to have, but it takes money to actually launch it, right? And so having the capacity to do that. Another thing I'm excited about was the wound care van that we did a small pilot over the summer. And the wound care van is really important for our work because it really speaks to the change in the drug supply that we're seeing in Philadelphia. And so previously it was fentanyl, and that is it's in every drug now. But now addition to that is xylazine or tranq, which is a animal sedative that's been added, which just creates these absolutely horrific wounds on individuals to the point where it's becoming an access to a barrier to accessing services. So people aren't able to access treatment or housing necessarily because their wounds are at such a level of requiring medical attention that the staff don't have those capabilities, right? And so having these mobile wound care vans out in the community that are addressing those wounds is really helping to bridge accessing services for the individuals that are most impacted that we're trying to get in. Another thing that I'm really excited about that we're funding is additional housing opportunities to support long-term recovery. And so that's something that if you're an individual and you're going in and say you're homeless before you go into treatment, when you come out of treatment, if you still don't have a home, chances are it's going to be really difficult to maintain that journey on recovery. And so we have the opportunity to create 200 more placements within the system. And so it's creating more throughput in the types of placements that people that are in recovery are looking for. And so housing first, couples housing, master leasing, those types of programs that we really see positive outcomes from for individuals. Another thing that I'm really excited about that we're funding through the settlement is a really large investment in a community-led, trauma-informed, equity-focused planning effort that's happening in Kensington. It's going to be a holistic master planning effort. Kensington Health and Wellness Corridors was the working plan name. But with that funding, we're actually providing the community the opportunity to have a say in how these investments are being played out with the guardrails in place of we're trying to make sure that people can stay in their homes. And so providing support around home repairs, rent relief, foreclosure support, provide support for parks. And so they're able to be safe and used for family-friendly activities, dedicated funding for the schools. And with this money, we're really excited because we'll be able to bring people to the table as part of kensingtonplan.org, where people can learn more about it. It's a really, it's something that on the administration side, we're really committed to. We've spent the last 18 months meeting regularly with Kensington community leaders, and we've heard their requests for support. And this is something that we're really happy to deliver on, and it is the largest thing that we're investing on from the settlement. And so that's something that a lot of us at the city are going to be involved with moving forward. And I just want to stress, like, we're not driving this planning effort at all. It's completely owned by the community, and I think that's so important, especially with transitions that happen in city government. For a plan to be sustainable, it's fantastic that they're taking up the charge to actually own it and have a say on how things are moving forward. And I'm really happy to have a minor seat at that table to move that forward. One other thing, sorry, Larry, one other thing I want to plug is another big thing that we're funding from the settlement is the Overdose Prevention and Community Healing Fund. Applications are open now. Like just went off. Applications are open now. They close February 3rd. There's 2 types of grants that are available, $100,000 program grants and $20,000 capacity building grants. Those capacity building grants could be a lifeline for those small grassroots organizations, because you can use it for staffing support, for rent, all types of uses. There's information on our website. We're partnering with Scattergood Foundation to launch that. So you can also go to the Scattergood website. But it's intended for smaller organizations that might not have access to larger funding opportunities like this. The ideal organization is working in Philadelphia, has a annual budget that's under $5 million, and has a track record of engaging Philadelphians around this issue. And we are it's a citywide fund, but we are targeting zip codes within Kensington and North Philadelphia, and that's tracking with trends that we're seeing in fatal overdoses, and that's why those zip codes are being targeted. So.
And one of the things I just want to mention, these funds are going to be distributed over 18 years.
Yes. Yeah.
So some of these and that's not equal funding every year, to my understanding. But there's going to be funding there for these programs for almost 2 decades.
Yeah, and so that's a great point. And so when settlement, the way it works out is that there's ranging amount each year from 9 million to 14 million. And so that's why this first year, like, we wanted to make sure that we were really creating as much impact as possible with this first infusion of funds. But there are absolutely projects that will be sustained through the settlement moving forward, but then also things that we will move on to general fund because we will be committed to them continuing to happen.
Okay, I'd like to bring Denise to right here and throw that behind.
Oh, Denise, I think you're on mute. It's the Zoom way.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate it. I guess my question centers around what the funding is going to, what the funding is going to pay for. One of the problems that people who have been, who are abusing substances and want to get help have is finding rehab centers to get them the help that they need. And after that, finding a means to get them out of the neighborhoods they were in. Because one of the first things they tell you in rehab is that you're not supposed to go back to where you were. That made it easier to use. Does the funding cover any of that? Has that been addressed at all?
Yeah, so there's and so the three areas that we're investing with the settlement are really focused on expanding mobile methadone, and so that's access to treatment where you are, expansion of the wound care van, and so making sure that wounds aren't the barrier to accessing treatment, and then also increasing the dosage in the prisons, and so that's to ensure that individuals that are most vulnerable when they're coming out of the prisons aren't relapsing and overdosing. The question that you're asking isn't necessarily going to get funded through the settlement, but it is getting funded through general fund, right? And so there's the settlement is $20 million, but there's a lot of other investments that are happening across the city in this space. And so I know that the Department of Behavioral Health has been working really hard to ensure that if anyone is interested in treatment, they're able to get access to it the same day. So there's been a lot of work put into that through the treatment strategy with the opioid response unit, but then also your piece on being able to not return to where you came from. That's part of the housing investment that we're doing through the settlement, but then also additional housing investments as well. And so there is a lot of focus on trying to support individuals that are interested in starting that recovery journey and making sure that we're providing them all the tools and resources to succeed.
Now, what about the individuals that aren't necessarily interested in treatment? There's been talk about naloxone and also needle exchange and different things like that. Are these things that you're going to be, that the settlement money is going to go toward as well? Or is it mostly toward trying to get people off of heroin or opioids?
Yeah, so there is a portion of the settlement that's going towards expanding overdose prevention, education, outreach materials, and harm reduction materials as well. But again, this is also another pocket that's also funded outside of the settlement as well through the opioid response unit and also through the public health department. We are absolutely our goal, right, is to try to keep individuals alive so they're able to make it to the point of deciding that they're interested in it, and so that's our goal.
Now, when it comes to settlements like these, is this like the final settlement? Is this all that the state was able to get? Because I know that in a lot of states, folks are still saying, okay, we thank you for this money, but you owe us a lot more than that, and we would like to have it. Is that what's going on with Philadelphia as well?
Yeah, and so there's so many caveats built into this. And so the number that I gave you guys is the number that we know right now. But there are other cases that the city's involved with. There are other cases that the district attorney's office is involved with. There are other cases that are still pending in court. Pharmacies, this settlement is specifically the national settlement from the distributors, but there's other cases that are going. So there could be additional funding coming forth in the future, but I can't forecast that. But this is what we know right now, today on January 11th, what the city is getting over the next 18 years. But it could absolutely be potentially more funding.
Okay, now you mentioned that part of this money is going to be going toward grants for grassroots organizations.
Yeah.
Now, I've been covering the grassroots organization grants in terms of gun violence, and they have had moderate levels of success because in some cases you're giving a mom and pop organization that's been funded out of someone's own pocket for years more money than they've ever seen in life, and they're supposed to have someone helping them to build capacity with that money and do various things, but that's also had mixed results. Is that something that's going to be built into your program?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was, we did take a lot of lessons learned from that project. And while it's a different funding source and different partner that we're working with on this, that's been top of mind, making sure that we are able to provide that technical assistance to the organizations, that fiscal guidance. There's compliance sessions that all the applicants need to attend. There's a lot of requirements around that just to make sure that people have all the support that they need. And it's also why we have the two different funding levels for the grant. And so it's to recognize like a small mom and pop organization that's literally running it out of their living room probably wouldn't have the capacity to figure out how to spend a $100,000 program grant in 1 year, but they could really use a $20,000 grant to help pay their rent or to help pay like program fees that they're dealing with. And so we try to make it scalable, but we do really intend for this funding opportunity to be for those organizations that have kind of been shut out of other funding opportunities. We are providing the opportunity for if they're not a 501c3, they can have a fiscal sponsor, and Scattergood Foundation that we're partnering with on this is willing to help and support these organizations as well.
Okay, and one last question.
Yeah.
This is an election year, whether we like it or not. And the opioid crisis, particularly in places like Kensington, has been top of mind for some of the people who are running for office. If you could tell the folks that are running, particularly to be the mayor and city council, what needs to happen for the city in terms of the opioid crisis, what would you say to them? And what kind of programs would you like to see them champion?
Yeah, well, I would really like to see a commitment from the next mayor to continue the work that we've been doing in Kensington with the community and supporting their holistic, trauma-informed, equity-focused, community-led planning effort that they're starting. I think it's really important that the next mayor continues the same dedication that Mayor Kenney has shown to this community. Like we know that things are not near perfect where we want them to be, but we are at the table with them. We are meeting with them regularly. We are dedicating resources to this. And I think it's absolutely important for the next mayor to continue that commitment to the community. I think also just continuing to prioritize our requests for these programs, right? And so there's a lot of programs that started as a pilot back in 2018 that are now going citywide, and just continuing those investments. One great example is police-assisted diversion. That started in one police district. By the end of the Kenney administration, it's going to be in every single police district. And we think it's actually the largest type of police diversion program in the country. And so we're really excited about that. And so those are the types of things that we're seeing value. The PAD program that's police assisted diversion, has great data on all the, just for Kensington, and all the connections that they made for individuals that had been diverted into their program, that they've been able to connect back to their either home county, to their families, or got them into treatment in their home counties. And that is, for those that understand the systems at play, that is really difficult and challenging work. They've been able to connect hundreds of individuals just this calendar year to those types of programs back in their home county. And those are exactly the types of things that we need to continue investing in moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us. I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
Thank you, Denise. And I just have one last question for you here. These programs the plan is to have them implemented by the end of Mayor Kenney's term in office.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you the hard question here. What does success look like beyond that?
Yeah, and so that's why the continuity of the plan of how we're spending the settlement living within the opioid response unit, it's part of our action plan, and so that we have every year. And so all of these items that we announce that we're funding, they're going to be the benchmarks, right? Like we need to hit them in this calendar year. And if not, like we need to be accountable for why we didn't hit them. And we continue to identify additional things to focus on. They're informed by our internal overdose fatality review process that we have that provides recommendations on how to improve different processes, whether it's internal or external with our health partners, on how to improve outcomes. So those recommendations are always moving in our action items. The data and program evaluation we'll see from these always leads to new recommendations moving forward and new action items for the opioid response unit to focus on, but also looking at our not colleagues, counterpart cities across the country and just sort of what they're experiencing. And anytime that there's an innovation that they're seeing good progress with, we try it as a pilot and we see if that works. And sometimes things don't work, right? Like Philadelphia is a really beautiful, unique, really challenging city, right? We're the largest poor city in the country. So, and that brings with it different challenges. So we don't always see the same outcomes as other cities, but we're always looking. And so what does success look like? It looks like we're continuing to, anything that's a pilot that's working, we're expanding. Anything that we think we haven't tried yet and that we think would work, we're continuing to try it, because we're all about this like fail fast mentality. Like we are willing to try anything in Philadelphia to address this. It is such a crisis and we need everybody at the table, and we don't have all the answers. We're always looking to outside experts to help us solve this, and we are open-minded. And so success looks like we're continuing that into the future.
All right, Noelle Poison, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we'd like to thank Noelle Poison for being with us here at Hall Monitor. Denise, I feel like everything is happening at once for some reason. There's all kinds of things going on. What are you keeping an eye on, and what are you going to be telling us about more on Friday?
Now, honestly, ever since Martin Luther King's birthday has become a national holiday, I've had one concern about it. And that concern is the commercialization of the holiday. Sure, you have like the King Day of Service, the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolent Social Change here in Philadelphia has a luncheon that is often so long it turns into a supper, but we're not going to go there. And you have all of these different things like nationwide where people celebrate King's birthday with church services and community projects and concerts and different things of the like. But one of the things that I have started to notice, particularly over the last few years, is that it has become a cause for two things: commercial celebration and for thoroughly inappropriate club gatherings. Now, what do I mean by that? A couple of years ago, I was checking my mail and I got a mailer from Saks Fifth Avenue's offshoot or outlet called Off Fifth. And it was advertising a Martin Luther King Jr. sale. I've also gotten these particular things from places like Sears and Kmart. And even car dealerships have taken to having Martin Luther King Day sales. On top of that, you also have nightclubs, particularly in predominantly Black cities like DC and Philly and Chicago and other places, where they are advertising King Weekend parties that feature such things as a person with like a big gold chain and a wad of money in their hand with Dr. King's face superimposed on that. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that it's a holiday weekend and people are off and people are going to celebrate the King holiday in a variety of ways. Some people are going to do service projects. Some people are just going to stay home and chill. Some people are going to go to the various activities that are coming along. But if you know anything at all about Dr. King, particularly in his final days before he was shot and killed in Memphis, he was there as part of the Poor People's Campaign. And the Poor People's Campaign was focused on anything but conspicuous consumerism. So seeing ads, for people trying to sell stuff and market it using Dr. King's birthday, it is something that just makes me want to A, pull my hair out, B, hunt down the ad agencies that are doing this, and C, take a baseball bat to all of their kneecaps. Because, there's a certain level of disrespect that you kind of have started to expect now that we're at this point in our teaching of history where people are thinking that if you ignore such things as racism, that it will go away, to the point where we're not teaching our kids what actually happened with slavery, and we're outlawing, anything that makes people actually have to think about how America came to be with any kind of realistic intent. But we understand that there's a level of disrespect there. But Madison Avenue does not need to get involved. And that's kind of what I'm going to be focusing on, because I know that probably by the end of the week, I will get a mailing with one of these things, or someone will send one to me, because people, who get them at home, they send them to me, or they let me know that they're out there, because I do this every year. And hopefully this will be the year, or sometime soon will be the year that we understand that using Dr. King as a means of commercialization is just not the way to go.
Well, and I think it's particularly insidious because I don't really recall getting advertisements like this. Are they directed at the Black community?
No, actually, because I get them from everywhere.
Okay.
It's just, now the club things, which are really ridiculous, those are targeted to people who go to nightclubs, and particularly in Black neighborhoods. And this is Black people who should know better, because in a way, I blame my generation, which is Generation X, a little bit for this too, because some of us were so focused on making sure that our kids did not have to endure what happened in the 1960s to get us to the point where we could vote, where we, could go to places without having to worry about what section we sat in, where we could take public transportation, without having to worry about it. We were so focused on making sure our kids didn't know that any of those things happened, or were never impacted by those things, that we didn't tell them that these things happen, and why it was important for them to understand that while Dr. King may be a holiday to you, you have to ask yourself how that holiday came to be, and why Dr. King is no longer here, and why he's no longer here. Because I think that sometimes, folks get so focused on King as a historical figure that they don't understand how he became a historical figure, why he became a historical figure, and why he is no longer here to talk to us about his own history. And he basically sacrificed his life so that people don't have to sit on the back of the bus if they don't know, or so they can vote without having to guess how many jelly beans are in a jar. And when I see stuff like, King weekend party flyers with him holding a wad of money in his hand and a scantily clad dancer standing next to him, I want to scream. But like I said, some of that is our responsibility as Black folks in Generation X. We needed to tell the people, we needed to tell the millennials exactly why this is problematic, and we didn't.
Yeah. Does it concern you as we go to the next generation and the generation after that? Because there are still people alive now who saw Dr. King speak and can tell you about that. But as we lose those people and we get to a place maybe 100 years from now, do you think the impact gets diluted a little bit because so much time has gone by? Does it go the other way where it becomes a bigger a bigger success in people's minds because he did so much. How does that look maybe 50 or 100 years from now?
I think that unless, and I can say this because my husband teaches college freshmen, until we start, reminding our young people that one of the main ways that you can get knowledge and understanding of things is by reading, this is only going to get worse. And it's going to become more of our responsibility to teach our kids, especially since, if it were up to the Republicans, or particularly in certain places, we would be teaching slavery like it was a choice, in the words of Kanye West.
Yeah.
It was not a choice.
No.
When anything that involves you being put in the hull of a ship while chained to several other people, anything that involves that is not a choice. You don't wake up one morning and decide, I want to be dragged away from my homeland, put on a boat, and turn into a slave. That's not something you wake up and decide to do. It's like,
Right.
It's the same thing I tell people when it comes to being a member of the LGBT community. Why would you just wake up one morning and decide, I want to be gay? Especially knowing what that means in this society. That is something you cannot change. Just like being Black is something I cannot change.
Right.
And I've been Black for 58 years. I have found at times it's worked for me, but at other times it has made it so I have to show people exactly why my mother always referred to me as both her nicest child and her meanest child. And when you see something like the King holiday being either divided into groups or otherwise disrespected, you kind of wonder, are you guys missing the point here? And I also fear that it's probably going to come up again when we look at Juneteenth. Now, don't get me wrong. Juneteenth is a holiday. That's a nice holiday. Thank you for making that a federal holiday or whatever. But I also can't help but think that the point is already being missed on that, because last year, as part of the Juneteenth celebration, you could go into Party City and see some totally inappropriate, Juneteenth party wear. And I'm like, but you're missing the point of the holiday, which is that this is the day that folks in Texas finally found out that they were no longer slaves according to the United States Constitution. And, don't get me wrong, I'm glad that these holidays exist, but my concern is that we're missing the point. And that's kind of what I want to write about, how we're missing the point, and we need to stop missing the point, especially since we're going to be required as Americans to be more involved in the educational process for our kids when it comes to this, because it's basically being outlawed in school. I mean, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is the new governor of Arkansas, proving that these people haven't been beaten down enough, decided to issue an executive order outlawing CRT. Now, for people who don't know what CRT is critical race theory. And the only place you're going to get taught critical race theory is in law school. If your 5-year-old is coming home and telling you that he or she has learned critical race theory, they don't know what they're talking about, because elementary teachers don't know how to teach that.
Right. And these are the things. This is the new boogeyman for the right.
Yes.
And really, what it is, it's a subtle way to continue their racism without saying it's race. They're supporting racism. That's how I look at it.
Right. And the thing is, if we don't find out, if we are not taught exactly how America came to be, we will never be able to negotiate the potholes that America's creation has led to for many of us.
Right.
And
so
and it's
do have to
intentional.
wrap
It drives me nuts.
Yeah, absolutely right. So next week on the show, we will be joined by Councilmember Mike Driscoll. We will also have on the program our own Lance Haver and Reginald Streeter from the School District of Philadelphia be with us as well. See you next week.